Right now, it's not a negotiation. It is a one-way direction. It is one group of people mandating to everyone else what is going to happen, and they will always choose themselves. The people who make the decisions that created the companies, nothing bad ever happens to them. They get raises even for cutting us. They get raises for shutting down studios that have been around for 30 years. And under their watch, because of their decisions. But do they ever suffer? No, they get bonuses. So that's not a negotiation. That's just a gun to your head with a different name.
Hi, I'm Aparna, and welcome to the Circle Back Club, a podcast for workers who are done pretending that the system isn't broken. I'm back for this final episode with my co-host, Lars Gallion.
I cannot believe it's our final episode. This has been an incredible season where we've been asking, what does it mean to build something different? And today we're asking what we think is the most foundational question of all, which is, what does it actually mean to be treated with dignity at work? And what choices would we make? What would we build differently if that were the non-negotiable starting point for us at work?
It's a really special episode because we're bringing in so many voices from so many places. We'll get to hear from Jazz Brizak, who's a labor organizer and the founder of the Inside Organizer School. We're going to hear from Madison Butler. She's an author and former C-suite executive. We're going to hear from workers and practitioners from the Tech Workers Coalition that, Lars, you got to record out and about in the world, as well as voices from a national culture conference that you and I just attended this past week.
What is dignity? It literally is here right now. Inherently, dignity is non-negotiable. It's not something that can be taken from us. It cannot be moved away, but we also are reaching and wanting it. And what's really cool about the body is the body also only communicates in the present moment. Your body is giving you feedback right now. It's contextualized in ancestral knowledge and the context of the day, but what you're feeling right now is just here. So dignity and the body have a lot to do with each other. So let's feel it.
I think dignity in the workplace for me boils down to sort of this fundamental idea that humans should be equal and should have equal value and should have equal respect and equal right to have their own humanity respected.
Something that I keep coming back to about this topic that I think is really complicated is the fact that dignity is inherent means that it cannot be taken away from us. And yet at the same time, when we're looking for it at work, we are looking for it to be given or shared by the people next to us, by our managers, in the system. And both have to happen, like both things have to be true. And for myself, what I've seen is when I've put my dignity in the hands of another person completely, especially a manager. And I'm thinking about a time when my entire team was laid off, except for me and one other person. And the way that I was told this was from my new manager saying that he could have laid me off, but he didn't because of my organizational reputation. And that was it. That was kind of like the backhanded compliment of like, you get to be here. So when I felt that in my body from, do I have dignity or do I not? Of course, I felt a huge amount of fear. And also my body said, okay, you hold the keys to my safety and my dignity now. And I did what a scared person would do, which is at the end of the meeting, I asked for a hug.
No, you didn't.
I asked for a hug. And so I don't know if this is, I mean, it's like, gosh, we know what it's not. We know what it's not at work, and we know when we've given it away. And I think this is a complicated topic because It's both something that we know is non-negotiable, but also structural conditions we need to create. And that moment for me always stands out because it was a visceral time when I knew that I had given it away completely.
It feels like so hard to hear
Mm.
because of who you are now.
Mm.
And there have been so many moments, just I would say even in the last, 5 or 6 years where I've had similar experiences, but recently one of those moments came back to me in a really hard way. Somebody reached out to me over LinkedIn. This is, an older person, and in my 30s, I looked up to them almost as a mentor. And then they did something really horrible, right? Like they told me that I had to suck it up and play nice with people that were bullying me. And I hadn't had like a one-on-one interaction with them for probably 6 years. And they reached out over LinkedIn and they said, "It's good to see that, you finally found your voice," in response to something I had written in Forbes. "It's good to see that you finally found your voice." And all I could keep thinking as I read that message again and again and again and again, like as we do, right? Like when we're ruminating, I was like, you're one of the people that tried to steal my voice away from me by telling me to shut up and get in line, right? That you could see me getting bullied by another colleague who was your peer, who was probably, 20 years older than me. And your response to that wasn't come to my defense. Your response to that was telling me to get in line.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so what's the relationship that exists between us? It certainly is bereft of dignity and it's completely bereft of respect.
Oof. Oof. And I think like to Jazz's point, right? It comes down to, is our humanity respected? And I think in both of those scenarios that we talked about, and I think it's a really easy place, even before we share like what is the definition? What are we hearing dignity really means? We viscerally know what it's not, and we viscerally know when both of the people we're interacting with did not have their own self-respect, right? By saying get in line or saying, you should thank me that you've kept your job, instead of saying, what is this human experience like for you and how can I meet you in the emotion that you're experiencing first? How can I meet you in your humanity? Our impulse is, let me organize you. I can organize you better.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. It's hard. I think that, when we look at the arc of our careers and we're almost halfway through our professional lives. And when I think back and I know that you and I have both spent the majority of our careers advancing some version of equity, inclusion, fairness, policies, practices, measurement, data, all in service of making work better for everybody and make the world better. And it always strikes me, and this is something that, does keep me up at night and it's constantly swirling in my mind, just how many people that work in these professions, they advance their careers by pulling people down the ladder.
Mm. Yeah.
And what an act of indignity to say that you care about fairness, but you show up in ways that are patently unfair and unkind.
And it is a truly a twisted, unique puzzle that we're in late stage capitalism to try to figure this out. Like, how do we untangle ourselves and get back to what it really is? And how do we protect it with each other when we're in these conditions? And, we dropped listeners, we dropped you in right away to let dignity be felt before we even define it, before we even, we have so many voices that we want to share with you today. And The invitation for you is to sit back and be as honest as possible with yourself as you're listening to Aparna and I show this really, really important, non-negotiable part of our humanness. Um, yeah, and just be with what comes through. And, I think just to set this up, right, as this is our last episode, it's really valuable to talk about what have we focused on to even get us to be able to have this conversation, right? We have spent this entire season really building the structural analysis. And if you're with us, right, starting in the 1970s, that shift towards shareholder primacy, that's episode 2 with Bachel Kuhl. We went into the psychological contracts that demand a certain level of silence. That's episode 4 with Leilani Lewis. Of course, the psychosocial hazards that we can't stop talking about, and that the system deliberately is producing. That's episode 6 with Dr. Nicole Decay. The self-advocacy trap, episode 8 with Hala Saleh. All roads lead to here. The word underneath it all is dignity. And so what is it actually?
As we've been recording this entire spring and talking with so many people, I think what comes to me is that dignity is not a perk. It's not a leadership style. It actually is the precondition, it's the foundation for everything else. We can't have safety without dignity. We can't engage in collective action if we don't believe in the dignity of every human being. It's the precondition for honesty at work and honest workplaces. And almost nobody in corporate America and really all of modern work has actually built for dignity.
Yeah. I think precondition is the perfect word to position dignity. It comes first. It comes before anything else. And Prentice Hemphill's definition and what it takes to heal is in my mind, and we're actually going to come back to this Brilliant Humans words at the end of the episode, which is dignity is the capacity to feel the inherent value simply in the fact that we exist. It is the seat of agency, of choice. And I think, Parna's hand is on her heart. Like, that's it. I think agency and choice being a really, really important part of this, of that if this is inherent, therefore I have choice in how I am showing up and feeling and being with other people. And to your point, Aparna, when we look at how the organization, the modern corporation is founded and power over dynamics, bureaucratic output, they're not designed for dignity. We are really trying to outsource it or give it, bestow it, or take it away from each other. And that's core to what the system is that we're in. So the question isn't, do leaders want to treat people well? We're asking if the structure and structural incentives ever even let them do that, which I have a feeling we all know the answer to that. But let's hear from others and what this question means to them.
There have been lots of points in my career where I've had to sacrifice that. I unfortunately think for many people who hold any kind of marginalized identity, they've had to show up in ways and outfits and voices that are not actually representative of them. And every time I've done that, it has felt like a disservice to who I actually am and very much like a betrayal. And I think for many of us, in order to actually climb the ladder, if you really want to, you have to do that. And so there are lots of times where I was someone I am not actually in real life, and I don't feel proud of that necessarily, but it was a survival mechanism at the time.
My entire conversation with Madison, it happened around the same time we had recorded our episode with Hala. And, this idea of self-advocacy as an individual coping strategy and not a systemic solution, how limited it is in its ability to give us the results that we want, right? And which is not to say that there are benefits of maybe negotiating your salary, right? Or I think as people who are socialized as women, to not raise your hand and say, oh yeah, I'll take the notes, or yeah, I'll order the cake, or I'll do whatever. And we even see executive women doing those kinds of things, right? So it does have, in some ways, it can offer you some short-term gains. And all of that ends up being hollow because dignity doesn't live inside the foundations of organizations. It isn't something we think about when we design policies. And now it's bringing, like, now I'm thinking about the conversation that we had with Hiba Yusuf on wellness, right? And we talked about the idea of the 3-day bereavement leave, which is not even federally mandated, right? Like, it's nice. It's a nice to have thing that companies offer, that you could have 3 days when somebody in your immediate family, a spouse, a parent, a child, possibly a grandparent dies. You can have 3 days. And if we were really centering dignity, would we constrain this period not of just grieving, but also of like the tactical things that need to happen when somebody passes away, that we've decided 3 days, we've quantified it and said 3 days is a sufficient amount of time?
That statistic truly is unbelievable to me. It's so strange, and I think is a really good place to think about dignity, because every single person experiences death. That is our shit. That's where we come together in the human experience, of just the experience of being alive, is that it ends. And to not design systems for that kind of spaciousness, for us to fully be in that human experience, is such a huge act of avoidance. Which means that no one, the people who are designing those policies are also not giving themselves that space, and that's grief. Like, and if we can't grieve, we can't change anything. So, ouch, 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 ouch.
I want us to play the clip from Chris. Speaking of designing systems, this is somebody who has been 30 years deep in designing people and culture.
I don't know if there's a shared meaning around dignity. And I think when we think about dignity and respect in the workplace, it's very similar. It's not well defined. And if it is defined, it's not well lived. And if it's not well lived, it's not well coached, developed, and supported.
It's exactly coming back to our episode with Dr. Nicole Decay on psychosocial hazards, where one, what are we actually measuring? Like, are we measuring the right thing that we need as people? And on top of that, do we have a shared definition of what can actually protect workers or give workers what they need to be successful? That's a huge, huge miss. And particularly in our society, we need room to practice. And this came up, Aparna and I where we heard from Chris was at this conference of changemakers. And we're so good at talking about it. We're so good at talking about what we need. We're so good at talking about what's missing, but we're not good at practicing it. And we don't have the room, to Chris's point. We're never going to have the room to practice it if it's not well defined, and if we're not given the space to actually live it, to be coached, to develop and support each other around it.
So, okay, let me ask you, what does dignity demand structurally that even the best individual leaders, right? Like the people, our bosses that we still revere, cannot provide by themselves?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, everything that I'm going to say is rooted through my teachers who have taught me what dignity is. So I'm thinking of Stacey Haynes, who's with me right now. Prentice Hemphill is with me, all through what does this look like from a somatic experience. And politicized somatics means you're rooted in the context of what is happening in the world right now. And so to answer your question, what does dignity demand structurally is literal structural analysis. We need the history. We need to understand why we don't have access to it. What and how was this system created, which we hope we're supporting in this podcast. And then you also need structural repair. We can't plop dignity on top of a system that is meant to exploit our labor. We can't do that. And so structurally, we need systems to help us to create repair. Interpersonally, as a leader, that's being honest about what system you're supporting, what you're responsible for, what it's like to be seated in a position of power. It's a responsibility to create systems of trust, systems of transparency. We have to be transparent if we're looking at the person across from us as actually having dignity. And to the point we were just talking about, we actually need to look at the metrics that we actually care about as people. And that is not something that we can just look at an individual leader to be responsible for. As an individual, you need to be committed to the healing process required to be able to access your own dignity. And all of that has to be done through that structural analysis as well. So it's a team effort, no small feat.
We're just going to send everybody back to graduate school.
Yeah.
Yeah. Where did you learn dignity? Why I learned it in grad school. I want to ask you one more question.
That's the most like
Um,
US. Like I studied
know.
it. Yeah. Anyways, go ahead.
I did study it. You know what's funny is when I was in grad school, I would battle it out with all of the professors, and I was like, none of this really matters. Like, teach me something that matters. And as I've gotten older, that learning has mattered,
Mhm.
right? I do think that there are a lot of people that are like, teach kids STEM, teach kids entrepreneurship, teach kids how to sell things and hustle and build things. And I think all of that it's not unimportant, but I do think that there is something about a really good liberal arts education that forces you to sit with history, that forces you to sit with and learn how to do structural analysis. Now, a lot of it doesn't translate into actions, and that is a battle that like we're up against all the time. And I think that's been the battle with DE&I, that's been the battle with collective liberation. But at least you have the language. So this is just like my little elite plug for getting a good liberal arts education. But I want to ask you one more question that's maybe a bit more serious, which is, what do you see as the connection between dignity and power? And I'm asking you that because, in the conversation that we had with Madison, she talks about, being in the seat of power and how it matters for certain people to be in those roles. And, she talks about how when you're in the seat, you have a little bit more space. You can show up differently. But what does that tell us about everybody without a seat and the people that are never going to be in a seat like that?
I mean, to simplify it, right? To answer the question around what's the connection between dignity and power. Actually, you know what? These aren't even my words. I'm going to pull up Stacey Haynes from the book The Politics of Trauma, because I think there's something here that I think can differentiate and be really clear on what it is and what it isn't, which is her talking about dignity and privilege. So dignity and privilege or entitlement are very different. We can think of privilege as something given by social and economic systems that can leave people with more access and a deeper sense of worthiness. Their dignity has not been systemically targeted, but I would not call this an embodied sense of dignity because it's built on false ground. Privilege depends on oppression and power over. In that sense, the dignity it grants is always limited. And the reason why I couldn't say this in my own words and why I wanted to read Stacey's words is that is and to your point, Aparna, like we see this happening again and again where it's like we're spinning on top of ourselves, like we're doing the thing to each other even while we're trying to break the oppression. And I understand Maddie's words of yes, being in a seat of power does matter. And to Stacey's point, you are then in the seat of something that was given to you on false ground, probably. It's not something that you can then bestow to other people because it was on false ground. Dignity does not come with power. Dignity does not come with power.
I guess, and perhaps power actually corrupts dignity.
Yeah.
Maybe. Yeah. I mean, you can't be. Yeah, I think that we've had variations of this conversation where we've said, can capitalism and dignity at work coexist? And I think, with one exception, a middle-aged white man, everybody that we chatted with said, no, you can't have that because capitalism necessarily requires extraction and exploitation. And there's no dignity in extraction and exploitation of labor, even highly compensated labor, right? Even the technology workers who are training AI to do their jobs and maybe making upwards of, $250,000 a year, there's still no dignity in that. I want to switch gears and play this clip from Jeff. And what was funny to me is that we did not coach him to say what he said. And he took us right back to that second episode with Bachel, where we talk about Milton Friedman.
Before the 1970s, they would only lay people off when they were in sheer bankruptcy. And then as soon as Milton Friedman came out with his whole doctrine, right, yeah, and it wasn't even a book, it was a freaking article. It's one article, and that's all they needed to be like shareholder value.
Right? It was completely unprompted. And how what happened in the 1970s with Milton Friedman, with Jack Welch, changed workplaces and not for the better. And it was almost as if dignity was decommissioned. It was phased out. Something that workers in the 20s fought so hard for. The 20s, the 30s, the 40s, all of the labor movements in the first half of the last century were, we lose it all to help a very small number of people get stinkingly rich.
Yeah, the rug was pulled. And the way that we related to work changed overnight, which, of course happens throughout human history as well. But that structural critique is necessary. What we might be missing is the question of what we can actually do. Individuals, leaders, literally here and now. What do we do inside this system? We have lots of folks who have told us about what that means to them, of what can we actually do about it. So let's listen in.
As a leader, are you taking PTO? Because if you're not taking PTO, neither is your team.
We've built this centered around friendship. So the idea of friendship, taking care of each other, looking out for each other in business, it's made it a great experience amongst the 5 years in doing this. It's been wonderful because it's a hectic line of work. But when you're centered around that mutual respect, love, friendship, dignity, we grant that to each other. So,
something that I struggle with is the question of whether dignity is actually scalable in a profit-driven system. And I say profit-driven because certainly the ways in which private sector corporate America works is wildly extractive. But I also think that there is an element of that in the social sector. There is an urgency to do things even when they're not the right things, even when they're not going to yield the outcomes that we actually say we want. And I guess I'm curious if you want to help us think through how we scale dignity, even if that's something that is scalable.
How do we scale dignity? Right? If we really believe that the individual and, of course, the person next to us, if I really believe that my worthiness is inherent, and a dear friend of mine says, I don't even say worthiness, I just say inherentedness, because it cannot be something that is given or taken away. If we, as individuals, choose to fully live our lives and see ourselves that way, then we can scale it. It becomes scalable because it shows up in our relationships. Is it scalable in a profit-driven system? I really don't know how to answer the question. How would you answer this question?
Well, I think that there's a part of me that feels like we can make dignity contagious by bringing it into the room with us really intentionally, right? Because it's felt in the body. And earlier in the episode, we played that clip of you where you talk about how it's inherently in the room, right? And it's in our bodies, and our bodies are also only ever in the present moment, right? Communicating with us. And this is something that I've been reflecting on a lot over the last, I would say very intentionally, the last 6 years, as I've sought to sort of, I don't want to say better my leadership, but just show up in the world as the kind of person that I needed, um, both growing up and that I certainly needed in my colleagues and bosses as I was coming, into my 20s and coming into the workforce. And so in that regard, I really, and obviously so imperfect and can sometimes be emotionally volatile just as much as any other person, but well, maybe not Adrienne Murray Brown or, some of our heroes, maybe they're just kind of always calm. But yeah, I feel like, can it be contagious if we just intentionally bring it into the room with us? And does that then ultimately have the power to shift things, right? Like the big things, the laws, the policies, the practices. And I think partly we could have laws and not the culture of just even self-enforcement. And so they're not sticky. And we see that with lots of dimensions of employment law already, right? But how do we make it contagious so that we can start creating some virtuous cycles? Now, I think it's really hard to do. And I want to take us on a side quest for a moment that I didn't plan for, but I saw an article yesterday that came out, I think in the New York Times or the Atlantic. And the title of it is actually, Democracy Dies in HR. And the tagline said, new research sheds light on how mediocre employees help would-be authoritarians maintain power. And one of the things that the article talks about is that authoritarian leaders, leaders with authoritarian tendencies, let's say, just need to figure out how to target their ideal labor pool, the frustrated and the mediocre. And then it says, the people who make those decisions, the research suggests, right, the mediocre and the frustrated, they're neither extremists nor victims. They're often just middling workers looking for a way to get ahead. It is a rough article to read. The title alone, you've heard me talk so much over the past year about the relationship between democracy and workplaces.
Mm-hmm.
And, this idea that we are getting trained to comply with an authoritarian regime by way of how work happens. What are the structures of workplaces? And I think for me all along, like the missing piece really was the role of dignity in our systems and in our interpersonal relationships. And
yeah, with dignity, none of that works. None of that manipulation works. We really, really have to buy into the fact that is what you just read is the way that we can get safety and that we can get worthiness and that we can get belonging.
I want to change gears again. And I want to play some clips about what it means and feels like to people out in the world. Because we've been talking about what it means to us. And I think because it is something so inherent, people have their own experiences with it.
It's not all tech companies, it's some tech companies. But as the layoffs are happening, they are hiring contractors without benefits. And so if there's a big group of people who are full-time workers and they're losing their benefits when they get laid off and then being hired on as a contractor without benefits, that's an active attack upon people's benefits.
Hi, my name is Luther. I'm with the United Video Game Workers. And I would say that to me as a worker, dignity is negotiation. Companies go through hard times all the time. Hard decisions need to be made, but that's a negotiation between leadership and workers. Everyone has needs. Everyone needs push and pull. That's how good things get made and problems get solved. But right now, it's not a negotiation. It is a one-way direction. It is one group of people mandating to everyone else what is going to happen, and they will always choose themselves. The people who make the decisions that crater the the companies, nothing bad ever happens to them. They get raises even for cutting us. They get raises for shutting down studios that have been around for 30 years. And under their watch, because of their decisions. But do they ever suffer? No, they get bonuses. So that's not a negotiation. That's just a gun to your head with a different name.
To listen without judgment, to listen seeking to understand versus being understood, not weaponizing, open feedback and communication, and leaving space just to listen. You don't have to actually have that same experience to validate that that's an experience that someone is having. And to me, that's what it feels like.
So I think what dignity and respect feel for me at work is that folks are able to show up in authentic ways and actually name genocide for what it is, and actually be able to discuss the ongoing systemic and systematic issues happening in the United States, but also across, right?
For me, dignity means being able to show up as my true self and not having to compromise who I am and the differences that make me me. I am a loud, laughing, vocal Puerto Rican who will not compromise who I am for anyone anymore.
I'm not a big fan of call-out culture. I believe in call-in culture, because oftentimes people's values and beliefs are what guide them in their ways of being. And then if we're not interrogating those things, then we can't promote change. There's that element of interrogation that's needed to be able to see one another's humanity. There's this poem that is in Spanish. It's a Mayan-inspired poem, but it goes like this in English. You are my other me. If I do harm to you, I do harm to myself. If I love and respect you, I love and respect myself.
I'm wondering if you had kind of a favorite conversation from the conference last week on this topic.
When folks talked about what dignity is, people tend to slow down when they talk about it. Like there's like an internal access that has to come through. Some people said, wait, I need to think about it before I come back. Like there's something that has to be felt to be able to tap into what dignity is. And I think across all of these clips, what struck with me, and at the conference, what struck with me too, is that it is all seen as relational, which is beautiful, because sometimes we think of dignity as, okay, it's me, it's my inherent value. But if I have that, then the next person does. And so all of a sudden we're in almost a forcing mechanism of collective interdependence. And all of these answers are about how we create that together, which I think is a really beautiful and concrete way to even take your first steps towards living a life with more dignity. Is, let me just start by looking at the person across from me. How do I, not to be overly corny, but you and me right here, Aparna, like, how do we really see each other in that way while we're in a conversation? How does that change our conversation with each other? How does that change the way that we design an episode, what we care about? There's a certain level of honesty that's required. And I think with all of these answers, it's rooted in that. It's rooted in honesty, and it's rooted about thinking about other people. What stood out for you?
I don't know that I have a favorite conversation that we recorded, but the one that I keep coming back to is from this woman named Chrissy, who worked in K-12 for 25 years. And she went from being a classroom educator with special needs kids to being an administrator. And she came up to me and she said, I want to talk to you, because you said that you worked in education and now you're doing something completely different. And I want to figure out what what my completely different future is. And my kids are grown and they're out of the house, and I'm swirling and I'm asking all of these questions. And then we ended up recording a really sweet segment with her, and she shared a poem with us. And in the poem, she says, if I love you, I love me. Right? If I can see you, then I can see myself. And we played that. And Yeah, I just think that so much of what this first season has been about is naming the things that we need to unlearn.
Mm.
Yes, we need to do the structural analysis. Yes, we need to call a thing a thing. And we've done a lot of that. And we've done a lot of that. But I think at the end of the day, you're right. It is about honesty in interpersonal relationships and consistently bringing that honesty, right? Like the honesty is not like sometimes I'm honest with you, but other time I'm actually being fairly duplicitous so that I can meet my needs as a frustrated and mediocre human being.
Mhm.
Right. But and even that
Mm.
idea of
Why'd
mediocrity,
that
look,
break my heart? Ugh.
as a fairly high functioning human being, I definitely have moments where I'm like, can you be more competent? Not you, Lars, right? But just like the world
Probably.
in general. Not you, specifically not you. Just naming that. But I read that article yesterday, and okay, I had to first of all read it like 3 different times because it really does require a graduate education to make sense of. And I just was sitting with this idea of like even the lack of dignity in calling somebody mediocre, which I call a lot of people mediocre, but not, let's say not infrequently. But why can't people be mediocre?
Let's go.
What is the need for excellence
Mm.
constantly, right? And when I was a teacher, the conversation, this is 20 years ago, the conversation was all about high achievement culture, high expectation culture. We should expect the most from kids. And I'm just like, well, why can't they be mediocre? I'm totally good with this happy kid that's not into academics, being the best plumber. Not everybody has to work at NASA, right? We don't need every child to design the world's tiniest chip for supercomputers. Maybe they just love going on walks and they can work for USPS and deliver mail. I think that's fine.
Well, we forget, and I am totally projecting on myself too as I'm saying this because it's something that I also need to hear. Is that when we are in struggle of learning something, that is where all the juice is. That's where we get to become. It's not when you have gotten to achieve that certain access of information or expertise. Like the process is the struggle. The best parts of who we are in the struggle. And I think that's honestly where we find dignity, right? It's like when I am in this questioning, when my shame is coming through, when my guilt, my fear, all of that, like that is the path to dignity. So yeah, we're really even at the beginning of our education, we're getting told a very, very narrow way for us to be good or not good. And dignity kind of just like breaks that apart when it becomes a practice, when it becomes something that we can protect and at least seek out for ourselves to like really be in the practice to try to find it.
Oh, the best parts of who we are in our failing. Okay, last side quest for the day is, as you know, I have been going to yoga now for the last 6 friggin' months,
Hey.
consistently at least twice a week. I
Cool.
still really suck at it. And some days are better than others, but there's a teacher who is a professor in her life outside of being a yoga teacher, which is wild to me. And I love taking her class. It's, like she teaches the class at 7 p.m. So she's already had a full work day and she's coming into the space. And one thing, so this idea of like, we know when dignity is in the room. I can't even tell you just how much of a container she creates in her classes. And it took me a while to even get to name why I was drawn to her classes specifically. And I think it's because she walks into the room and she ensures that we can live into our own dignity, even as we're fumbling on the mat and we're tipping over and we're struggling with postures and I've been to dozens of her classes now, and I've never had a feeling where I feel shame for not being able to do a thing, you know, where I feel like some of the teachers are very competitive, you know, they're like, and you can do it and you should do it. And right, she just brings, her name is Janine. She just is so kind, but the way that she lets us live into what you said, the best parts of who we are in those moments of processing, she creates the container for that. Yeah. And every time I leave her class, I feel like I just feel complete, which is not something that I ever would have said about a yoga class, you know, taught by a white lady.
Shout out.
Shout out to Janine, Yoga 6, Redmond. It's in a mall. The studio's
It's in a
mall.
mall. I love that. Long live the
It's in the
mall.
Redmond Town Center, which is, maybe they'd like to think they're not a mall, but it's giving like open air mall vibes.
Hey, we'll take the third spaces that we can get.
Yeah. Do you want to bring us into sort of possibility?
Yeah. And this is an episode of hearing from others, and I'm just like a geek with a stack of books next to me on my desk today, which feels really sweet. So this is Prentice Hemphill's book, What It Takes to Heal. And Prentice's words around what possibility would look like if we were in a society that wants to heal with each other. Yeah, this is what they say. So healing ourselves is not the end of the line, but brings us into relationship with others and allows us to do the work that brings healing to the wider world. For society and movements, it could mean that safety, belonging, and dignity become our metric for the well-being of our organizations and the people inside them. We could make room for authentic connection, timely repair, and intentionally build more trust and transparency. We might study the resilient and life-giving aspects of our cultures and practice while being aware of what drains and depletes. We could be careful about how we bring in the most traumatized of us, making sure we scaffold them with care. We could use how we gather together not to numb ourselves from the pain we face, but to build a collective resilience that carries us over the long term. And we could source our work with our visions, not our pain. How we work is as important as the work that we do. Can you imagine HR designed that way?
No, but can you read that last sentence again? Source our visions.
Yes. We could source our work with our visions, not our pain. How we work is as important as the work we do.
Yeah.
Thank you, Prentice.
Thank you, Prentice. What a powerful human ancestor. Yeah. Can I imagine HR being designed that way? Yes, I can. I can. And you know, just in our lifetimes of being in the workforce, 15 to 20 years, we've seen all of the different shapes and forms of this particular entity, right? Like human resources, human capital, employee experience, people and culture. And yeah, I do think that there is a world in which there is an entity inside every organization that exists to care for its people, because there is no organization without its people. There is no work without people, without workers. There is no innovation without what happens in the brains of humans and the connections that they can see and their drive to explore. And like all of the scientists, I think about just how disciplined some of them are for decades to solve something that feels so small and irrelevant, but has the greatest impacts on our lives. Like the people that design vaccines, what labor they put in, and what would it mean to care for them? What would it mean to care for educators? What would it mean to care for the people who do some of the backbreaking, like the most backbreaking work in society? So I do think it's possible. But then I think the other metrics that have to shift, and we've pulled from the work of Jason Hickel and Catherine Liu over the course of this season as well. Then we also have to change the metrics for what a healthy economy looks like.
Yeah.
And the health of the economy cannot just be in what the S&P 500 is doing.
It's actually not. Like, what are like that is not the real metric of the health of the economy. Ugh.
Yeah. Final thoughts.
Yeah, there's another piece, and I love that you brought us wide and just bringing us back in. And if you have a second, I don't know if you're listening to this and you're moving, or if there's stillness available, but I want to offer dignity. But consciousness around dignity came into my life through somatics, and there's a foundational practice in the lineage that I learned that both Prentice and Stacy come from and have supported building, called centering, the centering practice. And this is a way to feel dignity, safety, belonging, and purpose through your body. And the way that dignity is taught is through the length of your body. And so even just as I'm saying that, just take note of how you're holding your body right now. I'm noticing for myself that I have kind of a natural lean forward. There's like a bid of connection that I carry in myself that can collapse me a little bit. And in fact, if I were to adjust myself of like, how do I actually feel my length here? I'm allowing my spine to just gently grow, my neck to just be held in its upright position. And just from like a biological perspective, now I have more blood flow. I have more access to information because I haven't curled myself in. So there's something here in regards to what do we actually physically have access to when we choose to think about our height through our dignity. And so we've been in our head about this for years together in this work and designing this podcast. Part of this episode was also heady of like, what is it? How do we do it? Can we scale it? And at the same time, our body is telling us right now, like, where's dignity? So just feel yourself a little bit. What does my body know about dignity right now if I just thought about my length? And part of this too is knowing that, and these words might feel hard to hear, but it's truth, is that when we are overriding it, we are participating in our own extraction of ourselves. And the question is not, do we survive it? It's knowing what is the cost. And just thinking about it from the physicality of your body. For me, if I'm leaning in this whole episode, what's the cost on me to sit back, to be able to create more space and more room for possibility in front of me, to trust the fact that dignity is still here. I don't have to bid it while I'm on this wonderful episode with my dear friend. We can feel it. So that's the offer from a somatic standpoint. And thank you to my teachers for the wisdom of that, because it's right here.
Yeah. Yeah, we've spent almost an hour naming right feels like, and the fact that it's both personal and individual, and it exists between two people. And in some ways, it's also structural. And I think about the person at the conference last week who said we have to break systems and create something totally new, not yet imagined. They weren't being nihilistic as well. They're right. And that's what the quote that you brought forward from Prentice Hemphill. What's the source?
What's the source? Well, my friends, wow. This season, we built the case. A structural one, historical one, embodied one for why work in America and in other places makes us feel small, makes us feel the way that it does. And I hope that this episode gave you the word for what we've been building towards, which is dignity, not as corporate value statement, but as a demand, as a calling, as a inherentness that exists in ourselves that we can be with literally today, right now.
So if this first season was about naming the problems, and we named so many of them, season 2, we're going to be talking about building alternatives, and I invite you to stay tuned. We might have some fun little mid-season drops coming this summer, and we're so grateful for you to have been on the journey with us this spring. I'm Aparna.
I'm Lars.
And we'll circle back.